He was a king in a glass castle, and he just threw the first stone at his own reflection. Damian Blackwood, a name whispered with envy in boardrooms and ballrooms, had it all: $1 billion empire, a legacy to protect, and a wife, Linda, whose grace was the only currency his money couldn't buy. She was carrying his heir, the future of the Blackwood dynasty. But a whisper of a new name. Isabella promised a different kind of future, one of fiery passion and unconditional adoration. This isn't a love story. This is the story of a colossal mistake, a meticulously planned revenge, and the day the king realized he had willingly traded his entire kingdom for a beautifully crafted lie, losing the only woman who ever truly saw him. Damian Blackwood operated on a simple principle control. He controlled boardrooms with the surgical precision of a seasoned predator. He controlled markets with audacious, high-stakes gambles, and he controlled his life with a rigid, self-imposed discipline that had sculpted him into the titan of industry he was at 42. His home, a sprawling minimalist mansion in the Emerald Hills of Northern California, was a testament to this principle. Every piece of art, every angle of the architecture, every meticulously manicured blade of grass in the vast gardens was a reflection of his will. His wife, Linda Vance, was supposed to be the final perfect acquisition in this curated life. And for 5 years, she was. She was not a sycophant or a trophy. Linda, with her background in art history and a quiet intelligence that saw through the bluster of Damian's world, was his anchor. She was the calm in his self-generated storm, the one person who could meet his intense grey eyes without flinching, and the only one who dared to challenge him. He mistook her poise for passivity, her strength for mere stubbornness. Their life to the outside world was an enviable tapestry of success. To Damian, it was becoming a gilded cage of predictability. The polite dinners, the charity galas, the sterile perfection of their home, it was all part of the Blackwood brand. But it was a brand he was starting to find suffocating. Linda, ever perceptive, noticed the change. The silences between them grew longer, filled with the unspoken hum of his restlessness. "You seem a world away," she said one evening, her hand resting on her burgeoning belly. At 4 months pregnant, she was luminous, a portrait of serene motherhood that seemed to only amplify Damian's disquiet. They had wanted this child, or so he had told himself. It was the logical next step, the securing of the Blackwood lineage. He lowered his tablet, the blue light of stock tickers reflecting in his eyes. "Just a lot on my mind, Elle. The Harrison merger is proving complicated." It was a lie. The Harrison merger was a done deal, another feather in his cap. The real complication was a woman named Isabella Rossi. Isabella was everything Linda was not. She was a hurricane of emotion and effusive praise. A junior marketing analyst at one of his subsidiary firms, she had caught his eye at a company retreat. Where Linda was refined, Isabella was raw. Where Linda was a calm port, Isabella was a thrilling, dangerous storm. She looked at him not as Damian Blackwood, the husband, but as Damian Blackwood, the conqueror, the genius, the god. Her admiration was a drug, and Damian, a man who thought himself immune to all vices, was becoming a desperate addict. Their affair began with clandestine lunches that crackled with forbidden energy. He the CEO and she the bright-eyed analyst who hung on his every word. She made him feel young, vital, seen in a way he hadn't felt in years. She would text him breathless messages in the middle of a board meeting, thinking of you. They have no idea a king walks among them. He would read them and feel a jolt of validation that his wife's quiet, steady love no longer provided. Linda, meanwhile, was preparing a nursery. She chose soft, gender-neutral palettes of sage and cream. She consulted with pediatricians. She read books on child development. She was nesting, building a soft, safe world for the child they had created, oblivious to the wrecking ball swinging towards it. The first tremor came during a dinner with Damien's oldest friend, Jonathan Finch. Jonathan, a man whose loyalty was matched only by his bluntness, watched Damien and Linda with a troubled expression. Damien was distracted, constantly glancing at his phone beneath the table. "Everything all right, Damien?" Jonathan asked, his voice low. "Never better," Damien replied, a little too quickly. Linda offered a placid smile, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of worry. "He's just been working so hard." Later that night, the facade cracked. Damien was in his study, supposedly on a late call with the Tokyo office. Linda, needing to ask him about an upcoming prenatal appointment, pushed the door open without knocking. He wasn't on a call. He was standing by the window, his back to her, his voice a low, intimate murmur. "I know, Izzy. I miss you too. No, she's asleep. Soon. I promise, soon." The world tilted on its axis. Linda felt the blood drain from her face. Izzy. The name was a physical blow. She backed away slowly, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a sob. She didn't confront him. Confrontation was not her style. Her mind, sharp and analytical, went into overdrive. This wasn't a fleeting mistake. The "I promise soon" echoed in her mind. This was a plan. Over the next few weeks, Linda watched her husband as if he were a stranger. She saw the lies in his eyes, the stolen glances at his phone, the scent of a different woman's perfume on his suits. The man she had loved, the man whose child she carried, was methodically and meticulously dismantling their life. Her heart shattered, but her resolve hardened. This was no longer just about her. It was about her child. The breaking point arrived on a Tuesday. It was raining a relentless, miserable drizzle that matched the cold dread in Linda's heart. Damien came home early, his face a mask of grim determination. He found her in the library, a book lying unread in her lap. "Linda," he began, foregoing any preamble. "We need to talk." She simply looked at him, her gaze clear and unwavering. "Do we?" The simplicity of her question disarmed him. He had rehearsed a speech, a carefully worded explanation filled with phrases like "grown apart" and "different paths." But looking at her now, at her quiet dignity and the gentle swell of her pregnancy, the words felt like ash in his mouth. He pressed on anyway, driven by the intoxicating promise of Isabella's adoration. "I'm not happy," he said, the words sounding childish even to his own ears. "I haven't been for a long time. I've met someone." "I know," Linda said softly. "Isabella Rossi, junior analyst, 26 years old, enjoys hiking and apparently other women's husbands." Damien stared at her, stunned. He had grossly underestimated her. "How? You're not as careful as you think you are, Damien," she said, her voice devoid of hysteria, which was more unnerving than any screaming match would have been. "I want you to leave." He was taken aback. He had expected tears, pleading anger. He had not expected this calm, decisive command. It was as if she were firing an underperforming employee. "I'm the one who is leaving you, Linda," he countered, his pride stung. "I'm in love with her. I'm going to ask her to marry me." Linda finally stood up, her hand resting protectively on her stomach. The movement was regal powerful. "Then you had better have your lawyer contact mine. I assume Arthur Covington will still be representing you. I'll be retaining Margaret Walsh. She's the best." Margaret Walsh. The name hung in the air. Walsh was a shark, the most feared divorce attorney in the state, known for dismantling marital assets with brutal efficiency. The mention of her name was the first signal to Damien that this would not be the easy, amicable separation he had envisioned. "Don't make this ugly, Linda," he warned, a hint of a threat in his tone. For the first time, a spark of fire ignited in her calm eyes. "You brought ugly into this house, Damien. You brought it into our bed, and you brought it into the life of our unborn child. I am simply going to protect what is mine. Now get out." He hesitated, a flicker of something doubt, regret crossing his face. He looked at her stomach, at the future he was so casually discarding. But then the image of Isabella's worshipful gaze flooded his mind, a potent antidote to the guilt. He turned and walked out of the library, out of the house, and out of the life he had built, convinced he was walking towards the sun, never realizing he was marching headlong into a meticulously set trap. Linda stood by the window and watched his car disappear down the long, rain-slicked driveway. The storm had broken, and she was left standing in the wreckage. But she was not broken. She was just beginning to fight. The divorce was not a battle. It was a clinical, brutal dissection of a life. Damien, accustomed to winning, found himself stone-walled at every turn. Margaret Walsh, Linda's lawyer, lived up to her reputation. She was a silver-haired whirlwind of motions, injunctions, and discovery requests that left Damien's legal team, led by the usually unflappable Arthur Covington, reeling. "She's not just coming after the assets, Damien," Arthur said, his face grim, during one of their many tense meetings in his walnut-paneled office. "She's building a narrative. The abandoned pregnant wife, the philandering husband. In the court of public opinion, and potentially a real one, you're already losing." Damien, fueled by Isabella's constant reassurances, saw it as a final desperate act from a woman scorned. "Just pay her off, Arthur. Give her whatever she wants. The house a settlement. I want it done." Isabella was his shadow during this period, a constant presence whispering venomous sweetness into his ear. She moved into his lavish penthouse apartment, a stark, modern space that felt more like a showroom than a home. "She's trying to punish you, my love," she would say, her fingers tracing patterns on his back as he stared at scathing emails from his lawyer. "She can't stand to see you happy. She never really loved the real you, the powerful, untamable you. I do." Her words were a balm to his ego, which was being bruised daily by the proceedings. Linda refused to speak to him directly. All communication was filtered through their lawyers. Margaret Walsh presented evidence of Damien's profligate spending on Isabella lavish gifts, secret holidays, a leased luxury car, all while he was married to her pregnant client. The prenuptial agreement they had both signed was strong, but Walsh was chipping away at its foundations, arguing for a far greater settlement based on emotional distress and Damien's breach of fiduciary duty to the marital partnership. Linda, for her part, remained a phantom. She did not leak stories to the press or engage in mudslinging. Her silence was her most powerful weapon. It painted her as a figure of tragic dignity, a perception that was not lost on the tight-knit circle of old-money families they moved in. Invitations to Damien for long-standing social events dried up. Old friends became distant. He was slowly but surely being excised from his own world. He told himself he didn't care. He had Isabella. Their life was a whirlwind of passion. She encouraged his most impulsive decisions, celebrated his ruthlessness in business as a mark of genius, and looked at him with an intensity that made him feel like the center of the universe. Let them talk, she purred one night, pouring him another glass of expensive whiskey. We'll build our own world a better one. The divorce was finalized 6 months after he left. The settlement was staggering. Linda kept the family home a significant portion of his liquid assets and a child support agreement so ironclad it was practically a fortress. Damien, in his haste to be free, signed everything, eager to close the chapter. The day the papers were signed, he felt a wave of relief so profound it was almost dizzying. He was free. He proposed to Isabella that very night at a restaurant that dripped with Michelin stars. He presented her with the diamond ring, a flawless 10-carat stone that dwarfed the elegant antique ring he had given Linda. Isabella's reaction was everything he had hoped for. She wept. She screamed with joy. She threw her arms around him, her voice a theatrical whisper that turned heads across the dining room. Yes, 1,000,000 times. Yes, my king. The wedding was planned in a flurry of extravagance, a direct contradiction to the quiet, tasteful ceremony he'd had with Linda. Isabella wanted a spectacle, a statement. We have to show them Damien, she insisted. We have to show them all how happy we are, how little their judgment matters. They were married 2 months later at a historic vineyard in Napa Valley, which Damien had bought for the occasion. It was an affair dripping with ostentation. There were swans in the man-made lake, a celebrity chef flown in from Paris, and an orchestra playing under a canopy of 1,000 fairy lights. Isabella was a vision in a couture gown that was more siren than bride. But amidst the celebration, there were discordant notes. Very few of Damien's old friends or family attended. His mother, a formidable matriarch who had always been fond of Linda, sent a curt note of regret, citing a sudden illness that Damien knew was diplomatic fiction. The guests were mostly Isabella's friends, a young, flashy crowd, and business associates who attended out of obligation. During the reception, Arthur Covington pulled Damien aside, his face etched with concern. A word of advice as your friend, not just your lawyer. He began, his voice low. Get a post-nup, a strong one. Damien bristled. Are you serious, Arthur, tonight? I've seen her with her friends tonight. I've seen the way she looks at all this, Arthur said, gesturing vaguely at the opulent surroundings. It's not adoration, Damien. It's appraisal. Just be careful. Damien dismissed the warning as sour grapes. Arthur had always been protective of Linda. He returned to his bride, who was holding court, laughing loudly, her hand possessively on his arm. Their honeymoon was a 2-week tour of the most exclusive resorts in the South Pacific. It was on the white sands of Bora Bora that the first almost imperceptible crack in Isabella's perfect facade appeared. Damien was on a call with his company's CFO, discussing a sudden dip in their Asian market shares. It was a serious, complex issue that required his full attention. Isabella, who had been sunbathing, approached him, wrapping her arms around his neck from behind, pressing her scantily clad body against him. Come in the water with me, my love, she cooed, ignoring the tense conversation he was having. Give me a minute, Izzy. This is important, he said, his tone clipped. She pulled back, a flicker of something cold in her eyes. More important than me. We're on our honeymoon, Damien. You promised no work. It's $1 billion company, Isabella. It doesn't take a honeymoon, he retorted, frustrated. The pout she adopted was practiced, but for the first time he saw the calculation behind it. Fine, she said, turning away. I'll just go swimming by myself. Her tone was petulant, childish. It was a stark contrast to how Linda would have handled the situation. She would have understood the gravity of the call, brought him a coffee, and given him the space he needed, a silent partner in his success. The thought was unwelcome, and he pushed it away. Later that day, as if to make up for her mood, Isabella was again the picture of affection. But something had shifted. Damien had seen the wiring under the beautiful switchboard. Meanwhile, back in California, Linda gave birth to a healthy baby boy. She named him Theodore Vance. Not Blackwood. She sent a simple birth announcement to Damien's office via Margaret Walsh. It contained only the baby's name, date of birth, and weight. There was no personal note, no request for him to visit. Just cold, hard facts. Damien was in his new office, a sleek, impersonal space in a building Isabella had insisted they buy when the announcement arrived. He stared at the name. Theodore Vance. The erasure of his own name was a profound statement, a final clean cut. He felt an unexpected pang, a deep, hollow ache that had nothing to do with ego and everything to do with a sense of irreversible loss. Isabella came into the office, glanced at the card in his hand, and scoffed. Theodore Vance? How? Pedestrian? And how dare she? He's your son. Yes, Damien said quietly, his voice hoarse. He is. Well, don't let it get to you, she said, perching on his desk. We can have our own children. Better children. Real Blackwoods. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. She then changed the subject, directing his attention to a proposal for a new company logo she had commissioned. Out with the old, in with the new, right, darling. He looked at his new wife, resplendent in a designer dress, her face a mask of ambition and excitement. He thought of Linda likely holding their son at that very moment. He had signed the papers, said the vows, and thrown the party. He had gotten everything he thought he wanted. So why did he suddenly feel like the poorest man in the world? The regret, cold and sharp, was just beginning to take root. The first year of Damien's marriage to Isabella was a masterclass in psychological warfare, though he only recognized it in hindsight. At the time, it felt like a passionate, if tumultuous, new life. The first and most immediate change was his isolation. It began subtly. Old friends like Jonathan Finch, who tried to maintain a connection, were met with Isabella's polite yet impenetrable wall. Oh, Damien would love to, she'd say into the phone, her voice dripping with synthetic regret. But he's just swamped. We're launching the new European initiative. He's working 24/7. He's so dedicated. Then she would hang up and turn to Damien. Jonathan called again. Doesn't he understand you're building an empire, not running a social club? She framed it as protecting his time, as championing his ambition. Slowly the calls stopped. The invitations ceased altogether. His world shrank until it contained only one person, her. Her influence began to bleed into his business, Blackwood Industries. The company was his legacy, built on the foundations his father had laid. It was a part of his identity. Isabella took an unnerving interest in its inner workings. That board member, Mr. Sterling, he's ancient, darling, she remarked one evening, scrolling through the company's executive profiles on her tablet. He's holding you back. You need fresh blood people who share your vision. George Sterling has been with this company for 40 years, Damien countered. He was my father's right-hand man. His wisdom is invaluable. Wisdom? Isabella laughed, a tinkling sound that was beginning to grate on his nerves. Or stagnation. His wisdom is why your Q3 profits in the tech division were flat. You need disruptors, not dinosaurs. She began recommending people. A cousin of hers for a mid-level management position, a friend from business school for a consulting role. Each was presented as a brilliant mind, a killer who would propel the company forward. Damien, still caught in the thrall of her supposed belief in him, acquiesced on a few appointments wanting to show her that he valued her input. It was a mistake. The new hires were loyal only to her. They created their own siloed network within the company, reporting information directly to Isabella before it even reached Damien's desk. He started feeling like a guest in his own corporation. Decisions were being framed and influenced long before the official meetings took place. The financial pressure started to mount as well. Isabella's spending was voracious. It wasn't just the clothes or the jewelry. It was larger, more permanent things. An art collection she insisted they needed for cultural capital. A complete gut job renovation of the penthouse that cost millions. A whim to buy a chalet in Aspen. When Damien tried to suggest caution, her reaction was swift and cutting. "Are we having money problems, Damien?" She would ask, her eyes wide, with feigned innocence. Is the great Damien Blackwood struggling to keep his wife in the style to which she's become accustomed? How embarrassing for you. The accusation struck at the heart of his pride. He was Damien Blackwood. He didn't have money problems. So he'd relent, signing the checks, transferring the funds, all while a knot of anxiety tightened in his stomach. The lavish lifestyle was no longer a symbol of his success, but a chain around his neck. The mask slipped most dramatically in private, away from any audience. The adoring, worshipful woman he had fallen for was replaced by a demanding, volatile stranger. If he came home late from a genuine business crisis, he wasn't met with understanding, but with accusations. "Who were you with? Are you tired of me already?" Is that it? One evening, he found her in his home study, going through his private papers. Not company documents, but personal files, old letters, family trusts, his father's will. "What are you doing?" he demanded, a cold fury rising in him. This felt like a violation of a different magnitude. She didn't flinch. She held up a thick legal document. "I was just trying to understand our estate. It's so complicated. I want to be a good partner to know how to help you manage things." She smiled sweetly, but her eyes were like chips of ice. "For example, this trust for Theodore Vance. It seems excessively generous for a child whose mother erased your name. The mention of his son was a deliberate, calculated cruelty." "That is none of your concern." Damien said, his voice dangerously low. "Get out of my study." "Our study," she corrected him, her voice suddenly hard. "This is my house, too. Don't you ever forget that." The argument that followed was volcanic. For the first time, he saw the raw, undiluted venom she was capable of. She hurled insults at him, at Linda, at his family. She called him weak for still caring about the son he never saw, pathetic for letting his ex-wife get away with murder in the divorce. The fight ended with her smashing a priceless crystal decanter, a gift from his late father, against the wall. As he stood there, amidst the shattered glass and the stench of spilled brandy, the illusion of Isabella, finally, irrevocably shattered with it. This wasn't passion, it was poison. He saw with blinding clarity that her love was entirely conditional, a transaction. He provided the lifestyle, the power, the name, and in return she performed the role of the adoring wife. But the moment he failed to meet her expectations or questioned her motives, the performance stopped and the predator underneath was revealed. The regret was no longer a quiet ache. It was a roaring foot in his gut. He thought of Linda's calm, her unwavering strength, her quiet dignity in the face of his betrayal. He had called her predictable safe. Now he realized that her predictability was stability. Her safety was a sanctuary. He had traded a fortress built of bedrock for a sandcastle, and the tide was coming in. His thoughts drifted constantly to Theodore. He had seen only one picture of the boy, a candid shot an old acquaintance had posted online from a children's park. He had his dark hair, but the picture was too distant to see his eyes. He wondered if they were Linda's calm, intelligent blue or his own stormy grey. The longing to see his son became a physical pain. But what right did he have? He had made his choice. He had willingly walked away. The final piece of the puzzle, the one that would reveal this, was not just a toxic marriage, but a calculated act of destruction was put into motion by a man Damien had long since fired. It was a name from the past, a ghost at the feast he was now forced to attend every single day. A quiet IT technician named David Chen, whom Isabella had insisted was a security risk, had been let go a few months prior. David, a loyal employee for over a decade, had been deeply hurt by the dismissal. He had also, as it turned out, been incredibly observant. And he was about to blow Damien Blackwood's world apart. Damien's life had become a high-wire act over a chasm of his own making. On one side was the public facade of the powerful CEO with his stunning, vibrant wife. On the other was the private reality of a man trapped in a psychologically abusive and financially draining relationship, haunted by a regret so profound it colored his every waking moment. He was walking the wire, pretending not to see the abyss below. The call that changed everything came on a Wednesday afternoon. The caller ID was blocked. Damien, embroiled in a contentious meeting orchestrated by Isabella's corporate appointees, almost ignored it. On the third ring, he stepped out, an inexplicable sense of urgency, compelling him to answer. "Mr. Blackwood." The voice was nervous, hesitant. "Who is this?" Damien asked, his tone impatient. "My name is David Chen. I used to work for you, in the IT department." Damien's mind raced. David Chen. He remembered the name from a list of terminations Isabella had pushed for months ago, citing streamlining and redundancies. "I remember," Damien said, his curiosity piqued. "What is this about Mr. Chen?" "Sir, I know this is unprofessional, but I couldn't live with myself if I didn't tell you. When I was let go, I was in the middle of a network security audit. I found something that didn't make sense. A backdoor data stream from a C-suite terminal to an encrypted external server." Damien gripped the phone tighter. "Whose terminal?" There was a pause. "Your wife's, sir. Mrs. Blackwood. I thought it was strange, but I was terminated the next day. But I kept a copy of the server address. I've been monitoring it. The data transfers haven't stopped. They've accelerated. It's financial data, Mr. Blackwood. Proprietary algorithms, project blueprints. Everything." The world swam before Damien's eyes. He leaned against the cold glass wall of the corridor, the noise of the city below fading to a dull roar. It couldn't be. Isabella was avaricious. She was manipulative. But corporate espionage. It seemed too fantastical. "Why are you telling me this now?" Damien asked, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Because yesterday the server's encryption protocol changed," David said, his voice gaining confidence. "It's military grade now. But before it did, I saw the IP address of the recipient who downloaded the latest data packet. It wasn't just some random hacker, sir. The IP address is registered to a holding company, a company called Phoenix Legacy Partners." The name meant nothing to Damien. And I did some digging. Phoenix Legacy Partners is a shell corporation, but its parent company. Sir, its parent company is Rossi Holdings. Rossi. The name hit Damien like a physical blow. Isabella's name. He had assumed she came from a modest middle-class family. She had told him her father was a small-time accountant who had passed away years ago. Rossi Holdings. Damien repeated, his mind a whirlwind of confusion. I've never heard of them. They were big about 20 years ago, David explained. In real estate development, they were direct competitors of your father's company. There was a massive, incredibly hostile takeover battle. Blackwood Industries won. The Rossis were financially ruined. The patriarch Marco Rossi died of a heart attack a year later. They said the stress killed him. He left behind a wife and a young daughter. The blood in Damien's veins turned to ice. A daughter, he breathed. Isabella. Yes, sir, David confirmed grimly. This isn't just about money. I think this is about revenge. After the call, Damien walked back into the boardroom in a daze. He looked at Isabella's appointees, at their smug, confident faces. He looked at the documents on the table detailing a new, risky venture Isabella was championing. It all clicked into place with sickening clarity. Her flattery, her isolation of him, her infiltration of his company, her insatiable spending. It wasn't the behavior of a gold digger. It was the systematic, patient, and brilliant strategy of an enemy saboteur. She wasn't trying to build a life with him. She was trying to burn his to the ground. He felt a rage so pure and cold, it was almost calming. He had been played. He, Damien Blackwood, the master of the corporate universe, had been the biggest fool of all. But the rage was quickly followed by a tidal wave of gut-wrenching shame. He hadn't just been blind. He had been a willing participant in his own destruction. He had handed her the matches and the gasoline. He knew he couldn't confront her without concrete proof. A disgruntled ex-employee's word wasn't enough. He needed a professional. He thought of Arthur Covington's warning on his wedding night. Swallowing his pride, he made his second crucial call of the day. Arthur, he said, the moment his old friend answered, I need your help, and I need the best private investigator you know. Money is no object. Arthur didn't say, I told you so. He simply said, I know a man, Marcus Thorne, ex-MI6. He's discreet and he is relentless. What's going on, Damien? I think my wife is trying to destroy my company and my life. Damien said the words tasting like poison, and I think she's been planning it for years. Marcus Thorne was as advertised. A quiet, unassuming man in a rumpled suit. He had eyes that missed nothing. He met Damien in a discreet hotel bar, far from the prying eyes of his own life. Damien laid out everything David Chen's call the Rossi connection. Isabella's behavior, the corporate appointments, the financial drain. Thorne listened intently, taking no notes, his gaze fixed on Damien. This isn't a simple infidelity case, Mr. Blackwood, he said in a calm British accent when Damien had finished. This is a long con, highly sophisticated. Your wife isn't just an angry woman, she's an operator. Thorne went to work with terrifying efficiency. Within 72 hours, the preliminary report landed in Damien's encrypted email inbox. It was worse than he could have ever imagined. Isabella Rossi had lied about everything. Her entire identity was a fabrication. She hadn't gone to the state business school she claimed. She had degrees in finance and psychology from Stanford and the London School of Economics, funded by a mysterious trust. Her father wasn't a humble accountant. He was Marco Rossi, the man his own father had crushed. The report contained newspaper clippings from 2 decades ago detailing the brutal corporate war. Thorne's investigation uncovered a web of connections. The cousin she had placed in management was a forensic accountant. The friend she'd brought in as a consultant was a corporate espionage expert who had been disbarred for illegal practices. They were a team. The most damning piece of evidence was financial. Thorne had traced the flow of money. The exorbitant amounts Damien had given Isabella weren't just being spent on luxuries. Millions were being funneled through a series of offshore accounts, culminating in the purchase of huge blocks of Blackwood Industries stock through various anonymous entities. She wasn't just stealing from him. She was using his own money to buy the rope to hang him with, positioning herself for a hostile takeover. The final page of the report contained a single grainy photograph. It was of a tombstone. Marco Rossi. Below it was a smaller, newer one. Amelia Rossi, her mother. The date of death was 3 years ago. The cause of death, according to the coroner's report Thorne had procured, was suicide. Isabella's quest for revenge was fueled by a grief and rage that Damien couldn't begin to fathom. He sat in the sterile silence of the hotel room, the report glowing on his laptop screen. He saw Isabella's face in his mind, the passionate gaze, the worshipful sighs, the theatrical tears. It had all been an act, a performance of a lifetime. He had fallen in love with a ghost, a character created for the sole purpose of his annihilation. And in that moment of absolute devastation, the image of another woman's face rose in his mind. Linda. Calm, steady, intelligent Linda. The woman who had challenged him, stood up to him, and loved him without artifice. The woman who was raising his son. He had called her love a gilded cage, but he was wrong. It had been a sanctuary. He had left it willingly, and now the wolves were not just at the door. They were inside the house, and he had let them in. The regret was no longer a fire. It was an inferno burning away everything he thought he knew about himself. He now had the proof. The next step was to walk into the fire and confront the woman who had lit the match. Armed with Marcus Thorne's dossier, a document detailing a betrayal so profound it felt like fiction, Damien went home. The sprawling penthouse, once a symbol of his new life, now felt like a beautifully decorated crime scene. Every object, every piece of art Isabella had chosen seemed to mock him, a trophy from her silent war. He found her in the living room, silhouetted against the floor-to-ceiling windows, a glass of champagne in her hand. She was looking out at the city lights, the kingdom she was systematically conquering. She turned as he entered, a brilliant smile gracing her lips. It was the same smile that had once made his heart race. Now it made his stomach turn. "Darling, you're home early," she purred, gliding towards him. "I was just celebrating. Our new marketing initiative got fast-tracked by the board. Your team was hesitant, but my people managed to persuade them of the vision." "Your people," Damien said, his voice flat, devoid of any warmth. He dropped the thick dossier onto the glass coffee table. The sound echoed in the silent room. "We need to talk about your people, Isabella. Or should I say, Isabella Rossi." The smile on her face didn't vanish. It changed. The warmth evaporated, replaced by a chilling, triumphant calm. The mask was not slipping. She was taking it off, piece by piece, with deliberate, theatrical slowness. "So the king finally checked the lineage of his new queen," she said, her voice dropping the saccharine tone he was used to. It was now crisp cold and laced with an arrogance he had never heard before. "I was wondering how long it would take. You've gotten sloppy, Damien. Complacent." The lack of denial was more shocking than any confession. She wasn't sorry. She was proud. "Marco Rossi." Damien said the name, feeling heavy on his tongue. My father. He ruined him. Ruined him. Isabella let out a short, sharp laugh, devoid of any humor. Your father didn't just ruin him. He dismantled him. He bled his company dry, smeared his name in the press, and picked his corporate carcass clean like a vulture. My father was a good man. He built his company from nothing. He was proud. Your father broke his heart, and then his body gave out. But you Blackwoods, you just call that good business. She took a sip of her champagne, her eyes glittering with a fervor that was terrifying. And my mother, she held on for years, a ghost in her own life, haunted by what your family did. 3 years ago, she finally let go. I buried her, and on her grave I made a promise. I would not just seek justice. I would seek annihilation. An eye for an eye, a company for a company, a legacy for a legacy. Damien stared at her, finally understanding the depth of the abyss he had stumbled into. This was not a woman he could reason with. She was a zealot on a holy mission of vengeance. So all of it, the affair, the love, the marriage, it was all a lie. He asked the question, sounding naive, even to his own ears. It was a strategy, she corrected him, a very effective one. You were the perfect mark, Damien. So desperate for adoration, so blinded by your own ego. You have this deep-seated need to be seen as a king, a conqueror. Linda, your intelligent, dignified wife, she saw you as a partner, a man, an equal. And you couldn't stand it. You needed a worshipper. I gave you one. And you gave me the keys to your kingdom in return. She gestured around the penthouse. This apartment, the cars, the jewelry you so lavishly bestowed upon me. I sold most of it. The real pieces, anyway. The rest are fakes. The money, along with the corporate data my team has been bleeding from your servers for the past 18 months, has been very useful. While you were playing the loving husband, I was buying you out from under your own feet. The final blow came when her phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at it, a slow, cruel smile spreading across her face. Ah, perfect timing, she said, turning the screen towards him. It was a news alert from a major financial publication. The headline read, "Hostile takeover bid launched for Blackwood Industries. Board in emergency session as stock plummets." The data my team leaked an hour ago showed systemic weaknesses in your R&D pipeline and doctored earnings reports from the last 2 quarters. A little creative accounting my people put in place, she explained calmly. The stock is in free fall, and my anonymous consortium of investors, Phoenix Legacy Partners, just made an offer to buy a controlling stake for pennies on the dollar. The board, including your father's old friend, George Sterling, whom you so foolishly alienated, is currently voting to accept the offer to save the company from collapse. They will, of course, vote yes. It was a corporate checkmate. She hadn't just sabotaged him. She had created a crisis and then positioned herself as the only savior. You're destroyed, Damien, she said, her voice a triumphant whisper. Your company will be mine. I will gut it, sell it for parts, and salt the earth where the Blackwood name once stood. You will be a footnote in your own father's story. A cautionary tale about a fool who traded his empire for a pretty face. In that moment, Damien felt nothing. Not rage, not sorrow. Just a vast, hollow emptiness. He had lost everything. His wife, his son, his company, his fortune. He had been so obsessed with control, and he had been so completely and utterly controlled from the very beginning. He thought of Linda. He thought of her warning, "You're not as careful as you think you are." He had dismissed it as the bitterness of a scorned woman. It had been the unvarnished truth. He looked at Isabella, at her beautiful face contorted by a victorious hatred. "Was any of it real?" he asked one last time. She considered the question for a moment. "I enjoyed the challenge," she finally admitted, "and I took a certain pleasure in knowing that every kiss, every touch, was another nail in your coffin. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a company to acquire. My lawyers will be in touch about the divorce. I'll be taking this penthouse, of course. As for the rest, well, there won't be much left for you to worry about." She turned and walked out of the room, leaving Damien standing alone in the ruins of his life. The king was dethroned, his castle was collapsing, and he was nothing more than a ghost haunting the wreckage of his own monumental mistake. The regret was no longer an emotion. It was the very air he breathed, toxic and suffocating. The fallout was swift and brutal. Isabella's takeover was a masterpiece of corporate destruction. As she predicted, the board panicked by the stock's freefall, and the scandal of the leaked data accepted the hostile bid from Phoenix Legacy Partners. Within a week, Damien Blackwood was removed as CEO of the company that bore his name. Isabella was installed as the new chairperson, a move that sent shockwaves through the financial world. Her story, the brilliant, wronged daughter. Avenging her father's legacy became a legend, a dark fairy tale for the Wall Street crowd. Damien was left with a fraction of his former fortune. The divorce from Isabella was quick and merciless. Her lawyers, armed with the post-nuptial agreement he had been too arrogant to secure, took almost everything that was left. He sold the penthouse to cover his legal fees and moved into a small rented apartment that felt alien and impersonal. The tabloids had a field day, painting him as the billionaire buffoon, the corporate titan brought down by hubris and a beautiful face. For months, Damien drifted in a fog of shame and inactivity. The man who had once commanded boardrooms now struggled to get out of bed. His phone never rang. The silence was a constant reminder of the life he had burned down. The regret was a physical weight pressing down on him, making it hard to breathe. It wasn't the loss of the money that tormented him most. It was the memory of Linda's face, calm and knowing, as she told him to leave. It was the name Theodore Vance on a birth announcement, a name that was a testament to his erasure from his own son's life. It was Jonathan Finch who finally broke through the wall of Damien's self-pity. He showed up at the apartment unannounced, carrying a bag of groceries, and didn't flinch at the mess or the drawn curtains. "All right, Damien, that's enough," Jonathan said, his voice firm but not unkind. "You made a mistake, a colossal, life-destroying mistake. But you're still breathing. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" "There's nothing to be done," Damien mumbled. "It's over." "The hell it is," Jonathan shot back. "You have a son who is going to grow up hearing stories about his father. Right now, those stories are not good. You can't fix the past, Damien, but you have a duty to try and build a decent future, if not for yourself, then for him." Jonathan's words were a bucket of cold water. He was right. Hiding in the dark wasn't a solution. He had to face the consequences of his actions. He had to face Linda. Summoning every ounce of courage he had left, he asked Arthur Covington to act as an intermediary. He didn't ask for forgiveness or a reconciliation. He simply asked if he could see his son. The reply came a week later, not from a lawyer, but from Linda herself. It was a short, simple email. "Theodore and I are often at the Presidio Park playground on Saturday mornings around 10 a.m. He enjoys the swings." There was no warmth, but there was no venom either. It was an opening a sliver of grace he knew he didn't deserve. That Saturday, Damien stood at the edge of the playground, his heart pounding in his chest. He saw them immediately. Linda was sitting on a bench looking elegant and serene in a simple sundress, and running on the grass chasing a bright red ball was a little boy with a head full of dark curly hair. Theodore. He was almost 2 years old. As the boy stumbled and fell, Linda rushed to him, scooping him up. She kissed his scraped knee, and the boy laughed, his face lighting up. In that simple maternal moment, Damien saw the whole universe of love and family he had so casually discarded. He took a deep breath and walked towards them. Linda saw him approaching, her expression unreadable. She stood up, holding Theodore close. "Damien," she said, her voice calm and even. "Linda," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. He couldn't take his eyes off the boy in her arms. He's beautiful." "Yes, he is," she said simply. An awkward silence hung between them. What could he possibly say, "I'm sorry," felt like a pathetic understatement for the devastation he had caused. "I saw what happened," Linda said, breaking the silence. "With your company. With Isabella." He flinched. "I was a fool." "Yes," she agreed without malice. "You were. You chased a fantasy, Damien. You always needed to be the hero of a grand story. You just chose the wrong one." She looked down at her son, then back at him. "I'm not interested in hashing out the past. I've moved on. I started a small art consultancy firm. It's doing well. Theodore and I have a good life. A happy one." He could see it was true. She wasn't a victim. She was thriving. She had built a new life from the ashes of the one he had set on fire. "Can I?" he began, gesturing tentatively towards his son. Linda hesitated for a fraction of a second, then knelt down. "Theo, this is Damien," she said softly. "He's your father." The little boy looked at him with wide, curious eyes. They weren't Linda's blue or his own grey. They were a unique, brilliant hazel flecked with gold. They were his own. Theodore reached out a small, chubby hand and touched Damien's face. In that moment, the full, crushing weight of his regret crashed down on Damien. It wasn't just a company or a fortune he had lost. It was this. It was watching his son take his first steps, hearing his first words, kissing his scraped knees. It was the quiet mornings, the family dinners, the simple, profound joy of being a father and a husband. He had traded it all for a lie, and the reality of his loss was more painful than he could have ever imagined. He knew this wasn't a Hollywood ending. There would be no tearful reunion, no reclaiming of his old life. Linda's forgiveness was not on offer, only a cool, distant civility for the sake of their son. He could perhaps earn the right to be a father. But he had forever lost the right to be her husband. He would be a visitor in his own child's life. A weekend dad, a man on the periphery of the family he was meant to lead. He stayed for an hour, pushing Theodore on the swings, his movements clumsy and uncertain. He watched the easy, loving bond between mother and son, a bond he was not a part of. As he left the park, he looked back one last time. Linda was lifting Theodore into the air, and the boy's laughter echoed across the green lawn. It was the sound of the life he had lost, a life that would go on vibrantly and beautifully without him. He was the millionaire who had everything, and in the end had ended up with nothing that truly mattered. Damien Blackwood's story is a stark, brutal reminder that the highest towers can have the weakest foundations. He didn't just lose his fortune. He lost his moral compass in the blinding glare of flattery and ego. He traded the quiet, unwavering love of his pregnant wife Linda for the thrilling, passionate performance of a master manipulator, Isabella. This wasn't just a mistake. It was the willing demolition of a real family for a beautiful, calculated lie. The regret he now lives with is his true life sentence. What do you think? Was Damien a victim of a brilliant con, or did he get exactly what he deserved for his betrayal? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of drama betrayal and ultimate regret moved you, please give this video a like. Share it with someone who loves a story of real-life consequences, and don't forget to subscribe for more gripping narratives you won't want to miss.